Hey everyone, John here. Just a quick word of warning. We will be spoiling this film in its entirety, so if you have not seen this film and you don't want it spoiled for you, just hit pause real quick and go and watch the movie and then come back and enjoy the show.
But I don't want to make a film where they show up, they sit down, they jack off, and they get up and they get out before the story ends. It is my dream, it is my goal, it is my idea to make a film that the story just sucks them in. And when they spurt out that joy juice, they just gotta sit in it. They can't move until they find out how the story ends.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Surviving Chick Flicks, Manly Movie of the Month edition. I'm John.
And I'm Sammy.
And I'm a big, bright, shining star.
Oh my God.
So we joke constantly about the day we have the argument on air, and today may be one of those days. But this is our second Manly Movie of the Month, and Sammy picked Lawless for us last month, and as it's one of her favorite films, and I went to the well and picked up one of my favorite films, the 1997 drama, kind of comedy, but in my opinion, classic Boogie Nights. So I have a lot to talk about, and Sammy has a lot to yell about. So,
just ignore all the sniffling in the background. I'm just silently trying not to weep out loud.
So you're not doing massive amounts of coke in celebration of the movie? Cool. Because there is so much cocaine in this movie. All right, so let's.
I actually made a note about that, so that's definitely going to be something we have to talk about.
Yeah, so let's play the trailer, and then I'll take 20 minutes to discuss list off all the actors, and then we'll get into the discussion.
Everyone's given one special thing, right? Everyone's blessed with one special thing. I want you to know I plan on being a star. A big, bright, shining star.
Eddie Adams from Torrance.
Yep.
Jack Horner, filmmaker. I make exotic pictures.
In 1977, a kid from nowhere.
Maybe think about your name.
My name, yeah.
Something a little pizzazz.
Dirk Diggler. Good name.
I like your name a lot.
Had a dream of getting somewhere.
Jack Horner has found something special in newcomer Dirk Diggler.
So let me just pop in this 8-track, and you just give a listen and tell me what you think, okay?
It was a time when disco was king.
These are the ones. These are great.
Yeah, those are really cool. Are they lizard?
No, they're Italian.
Do you like my shoes?
They're pretty cool.
Sex was safe.
Woohoo!
Pleasure was a business.
Cut. Terrific. Nice work.
And business was booming.
And the award for Best Newcomer goes to Mr. Dirk Diggler.
Wow.
Goodbye, 1979. Hello, 1980. Are you ready?
But in 1980,
Come on, you puppies!
the party was over.
You are fired! What? You're fired!
It's jealousy, it's deceitfulness, it's vindictiveness, but, I mean, God, what can you expect when you're on top?
Oh, wait. Love this part.
New Line Cinema presents a portrait of 2 decades in the life of a business, the days of a dreamer, and the nights in between. Boogie Nights.
right, deep breath. Boogie Nights, starring Mark Wahlberg, Burt Reynolds, Julianne Moore, John C. Reilly, Heather Graham, Don Cheadle, William H. Macy, Nicole Ari Parker, Philip Seymour Hoffman, Luis Guzman, Ricky Jay, Robert Ridgely, Melora Walters, Thomas Jane, Philip Baker Hall, Alfred Molina, Nina Hartley, Joanna Gleason, Laurel Holloman, Veronica Hart, John Doe, Michael Penn, and Robert Downey Sr., written and directed by Paul Thomas Anderson. Yes, by the way, I could have left about 6 of those names off, but as I was rewatching it, and I actually paid attention to some of the credits, and I went back to my notes and added like 4 names because they were famous off screen.
Yeah, you could have left a lot more than just a few off of there. Also, I had no idea that Robert Downey's dad was in this.
Yeah, Robert Downey Sr. is one of the influences on this movie, and
that makes a lot more sense now. Actually, like combining what I know about Robert Downey Jr.'s childhood from what he's talked about and his dad's like involvement in this film, things are starting to come together.
Well, it really has more to do with Robert Downey Sr., the director, and not Robert Downey Sr., the parent. Most of the mommy and daddy issues of this movie come from Paul Thomas Anderson because, he had a complicated childhood. He's actually one of 9 kids.
Anybody that crafted this movie would have had to have had a difficult childhood. I am convinced.
Yeah. Well, and also, part of the evolution of this film is Paul Thomas Anderson grew up in the Valley where most of this stuff took place. So he would see it on TV and like, those True Hollywood stories or those like 48 hours exposés or on, the girl that gets off the bus on to LA, wanting to be a star, gets into drugs, gets into porn, or gets into porn, gets into drugs, shoots herself. Like, Paul Thomas Anderson saw so many of those stories, it ended up being a major influence because he's like, they were kind of darkly comic after a while because every time it was the same story. And growing up in the Valley, that was kind of the Hollywood for the porn industry, at least in California. So, yeah, real quick, for those of you who haven't seen this film, it's about porn in the 70s and the 80s. It's about a young man named Eddie Adams who becomes a porn star named Dirk Diggler, who finds incredible highs and incredible lows in his journey through superstardom as a porn star. Just for shits and giggles, because we kind of do this every episode, or at least try to do this every episode. Sammy, when was the first time you saw this film?
Last night.
Okay.
Well, I mean, that's true and not true. So I did see like a chunk of this film, like, I don't know, maybe half an hour of it or so on HBO. I don't know, maybe a couple years ago. So,
Okay.
and I knew the story, but I actively avoided it.
And then some asshole was just like, hey, let's talk about it on our podcast.
Right. Some asshole came up with this idea that we should do this thing called Manly Movie of the Month for all the movies we want to talk about that we can't fit into our bullshit rules for chick flicks.
Hey, don't call the bullshit rules I made up bullshit.
So if you don't know what our bullshit rules are for chick flicks, you need to go back and listen to our previous episodes. And our Manly Movie of the Months are movies we do once a month that are just movies we want to talk about because they don't fit into the rest of our criteria. And that's how this happened to me.
So, John, when was the first time you saw this movie? Thank you for asking. So the first time I saw this movie, all right, so this is Paul Thomas Anderson, who I'm just going to refer to as PTA from this point on because that's kind of how everyone says his name now. So this is PTA's second film, and we'll get into his first feature film here in a little bit because there's kind of a debacle that went on with that. But I saw his second, third, and fourth films in a weekend, in like the same weekend. I rented Boogie Nights and Magnolia, the follow-up to this film, which kind of are a part one and part two in the way that Rubber Soul and Revolver, the Beatles albums, are kind of a part one and part two. And I saw them in preparation for his fourth film, which was opening up in theaters, and I was so happy it came to our hometown, Punch Drunk Love with Adam Sandler and Emily Mortimer. And I came very close when I bought my ticket to yelling at a theater employee because of that.
Really?
Yeah. So I would say I was around 22, 23, like somewhere in my college years, maybe 21, somewhere in that gap. So I looked like a kid right out of high school, basically. And I was going to see an Adam Sandler film, as this theater employee presumed. And this is part of why I hate film snobs, even though I am one. Because as I bought my ticket and was heading inside, I heard the ticket taker say something about these kids coming to see this Adam Sandler film and not knowing what it is. And I wanted to go back and yell in this guy's face because I was not going to see an Adam Sandler film. By this point, I had kind of cooled on Adam Sandler. I was coming to see a Paul Thomas Anderson film. Like, I knew what I was going to see.
Only you would get angry about that.
I know, I would. But also, but there was more to this because that guy was always the ticket taker or an usher every time I went to that particular theater. And because I was also a critic at the same time, I would occasionally ask him questions. Try to joke with him, be friendly. Like, I remember going to see The Butterfly Effect because I was there to do the review. And because Ashton Kutcher didn't have the best reputation movie-wise, usually his films got trashed. So I was just like, hey, how bad is this one? And the guy was just like, if you're thinking it's bad, why are you coming to see this film? I'm like, fuck you. So,
right?
Yeah. So
well,
it wasn't
probably
just...
not a... Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so it's not so much that he was assuming I was there just to see an Adam Sandler film, thinking I was going to see something stupid. This was like a long, ongoing, deep-seated, I wanted to punch this guy in the face thing because he was just a dick.
Punch Drunk Love is probably one of Adam. I haven't seen it, but from what I hear, it's probably one of his better films. And shocker, now looking through his filmography, this is the first Paul Thomas Anderson film I have seen.
It does surprise me a little bit, just because I would have assumed, like a lot of people, you might have seen There Will Be Blood, because, all right, PTA is one of those directors that a lot of film snobs on the internet kind of describe as the Emperor Has No Clothes, that, only film snobs go to see his stuff to be, and rave about it just so they can, try to be cool at him. I'm like, I legitimately love every single Paul Thomas Anderson film on some level. There are ones I like more than this. There's some I like more than others. But I think everything he's done has had merit. And he's actually, if I was to go through all the different filmmakers that I know I love, Scorsese is my obvious number one, and I would put PTA as my number two, because he's made 8 films, and on some level, I think he's made 8 masterpieces. Sometimes the films, you need to watch them more than once to really get it. I was that way about his most recent film, Phantom Thread. I saw it in the theaters, and I'm like, I think I liked it. And then whenever I saw it on DVD, it finally clicked. I'm like, oh my God, this film is so funny. Why did I not pick up on this the first time? And I think usually my first dive into a PTA film is I need to know the world I'm getting into. And then I'm going to go back and really immerse myself in what he's telling me. And what's great about him is he's, for the most part, never made the same film twice. He's used a lot of the same actors. In fact, he's shooting his 9th film right now, and he's using I believe he's using the son of one of the actors he's used multiple times that is sadly no longer with us.
Which lots of directors do that. And, everybody's got their everybody's got their thing, and for a long time, for me, I don't judge anybody on their favorite directors because I go pretty mainstream with it. For a long time, I fought between Steven Spielberg because I just think he's a genius, and a little bit. I know a lot of people for some reason have issues with James Cameron, but I couldn't deny the fact that the man like directs a movie every 10 years and makes the highest grossing film of all time. A
Yeah,
little bit, he's like a little bit how Daniel Day-Lewis comes out and makes a movie once every 10 years and wins an Oscar.
yeah.
Like it's kind of like the same
Well,
thing. But I
well,
think it's
Daniel
got to be
Day.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say Daniel Day-Lewis needs that 8-year gap in between the two films to calm down because he goes into absolute madness with each film to the point of, are you really immersing yourself in the character, or are you being a dick?
Right.
Because sometimes it's hard to tell.
But I think I've finally gotten to the point now where it's probably just some weird competition between Steven Spielberg and Quentin Tarantino.
Which is maybe the. Well, I mean, in a way, I get it. I mean, I can hear film trolls on Letterboxd going, populist garbage. Um, whereas I may not I may not be the biggest Spielberg fan anymore. Like, to me, I don't think he's made a film on the level of the expectations I used to have for him since 2005. Like, I think Munich was Spielberg's last truly great film, but I still show up at a lot of them, hoping like maybe this one. Bridge of Spies came kind of close, but at the same time, it was just very, it's kind of a milquetoast movie at the end of the day. But I mean, I get it. I owe my childhood, honestly, to Spielberg and Cameron and Lucas, and to a lesser degree Nick Castle, because he made The Last Starfighter, and Chuck Jones and the Looney Tunes gang. So I get
But
it.
I get it. Like I kind of agree. Like Spielberg has a special place because he created some of my like favorite childhood movies. Like there's just
Right.
movies I'll never ever forget Jurassic Park. Like that's always going to be a staple that I have to watch every so
So
often. But
so
Quentin
just
Tarantino, oh go ahead.
well, let me make you a little bit jealous. I saw Jurassic Park opening day in the theater.
I would say you
I
suck, but I was too young too, so.
Yeah, because look, I saw that trailer and I was just like, Mom, Dad, I want to go see that, and they're like, yeah, we're going to see that. Then The Lost World happened, and I was just like, oh.
Yeah.
I think that was my first disillusionment with a director.
But the other night we were just hanging out in the living room and Inglourious Bastards was on, and whenever that movie's on, I just have to sit and watch it, and it just reminded me of what a genius he is. So they're kind of,
Yeah, and QT, he is somewhere in that. I would say he's somewhere in my top 10, because Scorsese and PTA is obvious, but Fincher's got to be in there, Kubrick's got to be in there. I have a giant 15-pound box set of movies that says Ingmar Bergman better fucking be in there. So, I mean, we have the ones we like. PTA, Quentin Tarantino. Once upon a time, I would say the same thing about Cameron Crowe. Anytime they put a film out and it went theatrical, I was there. Sadly, some of the PTA films have not played here, but I, like a dork, I do own them all, and I think every single one of them has merit. And usually, someone from each film has been in some of the others. So, Paul Thomas Anderson has been kind of a working filmmaker since high school. And in fact, Boogie Nights really began in the 80s when Paul Thomas Anderson was still in high school. At 17, he made a mockumentary called The Dirk Diggler Story. And because, he grew up in the Valley. He grew up around porn. And, because, his dad was famous and helped get PTA like a lot of early gigs. Ernie Anderson, his dad, he was one of those. He did a lot of announcement stuff. Like he did the opening. He would do the commercials for Star Trek: The Next Generation, like the next week on, whenever like, and one episode would end and it would be like next week on this show. Ernie Anderson did that for a while. He was a long running, well beloved host of horror films on TV called Ghoulardi, and that's what Paul Thomas Anderson nicknamed his production company, is Ghoulardi Films. And this film is actually dedicated to Ernie Anderson because Ernie passed away in '95. So,
this raises some questions for me because, and you may know in like the deep history dive that you did, because as I'm watching this film, starting from the mother character he created, Eddie's mother, and then Julianne Moore's character, which we'll get into the fact that she was never going to be a winner for me because I don't actually like Julianne Moore very much. But his mother, the mother character, was so awful. I mean, so awful. She was the first moment that I was like, all right, well, I'm going to spend the rest of this movie just feeling terrible for him because
yeah.
he's a victim of child abuse, essentially. And then Julianne Moore, I was like, I don't know if Paul Thomas Anderson is like, whatever the reverse of an Oedipus complex is, was what that character was working out. And it seems to me like he had some deep-seated mother issues.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what happened between PTA and his mom, but his Wikipedia article did say he was very close to his dad and he had a very complicated relationship with his mother. The closest the closest we'll ever come to any kind of answer is whenever they were shooting the scene where his mom basically kicks him out of the house. Joanna Gleason, who plays Eddie's mom, while Mark Wahlberg is still Eddie Adams, she asked him, "You didn't have the best relationship with your mother," like something to that effect. Like, what did she do to you? And he didn't answer. He just kind of dropped his head, and she just put her hand on his shoulder, and it was just like, "You don't have to forgive her." And that's the most information we have, because I know PTA will never talk about it. And if you'll notice, all right, well, you've only seen this one film, but for the most part, every film PTA has made, maybe not so much Punch Drunk Love, and I would have to do a rewatch of Inherent Vice to see if there's someone that qualifies. But most of Paul Thomas Anderson's films are personal, and they are about his father. Like There Will Be Blood, Boogie Nights. He's The Master for sure, Phantom Thread. All of them are about father figures. So,
well, yeah, it seemed like in the contrast to the mother, like the mother figures, the women he put in this movie and how he portrayed them, he had father figures in a sense for Eddie. Like his own father was really quiet and allowed the abuse, but he clearly wasn't the one doing the abuse. Like he seemed to be fine. And I guess Jack, for whatever that's worth, I also think that was a semi-abusive relationship because I very much think they took advantage of a 17-year-old, but we'll get into that. But for what it's worth, he was still sort of a father figure.
He was, and, all the way up into the end, even when, after becoming Dirk and everything going to his head, most of it blow, even after Jack fires him and kicks him out of that house, and he's still able to come back and ask for forgiveness and get that father he needed. Yeah, because whenever Eddie's still living at home, his father is just like trying his best to still have a relationship with his son. Like you can tell he genuinely cares, and he is just so shit scared of the mom. He's just like, I can't like in that scene, I really like when Eddie leaves. I hope the scene we didn't see in that house was his dad packing his shit and leaving.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, realistically, it should have been him going after his son and going, "Hey, you know, let's just leave and start over." And that means that I want to say PTA doesn't have a complicated history with women, but he kind of does. I mean, there's speculation that um, one of the songs on Fiona Apple's most recent album was written about him, about basically telling her, basically saying she's not going to shut up. But he's been with his partner, Maya Rudolph, for I guess since they met on the set of The
Oh, I didn't
Prairie
know they
Home
were
Companion.
married.
I don't think they're actually married. I think they're domestic partners, but she does refer to him as her husband. But I don't think they're technically legally married, but they're, together and have been for a while.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So before this film got made, PTA, take with the advantages that his dad kind of gave him, um, started making his own short films, and the first one he made after the Dirk Diggler story, and the one that really kind of got him some attention was a film called Cigarettes and Coffee, and it was, kind of a precursor to his debut film, but he was doing a PA job, and Philip Baker Hall, who plays Floyd Gondoli in this film, um, was on whatever job PTA was doing, and he said, "Hey, I wrote this I wrote this film for you, and I'd love for you to do it." And PTA kind of believes that Philip Baker Hall has never truly been the superstar that he thinks he should have been. And in a way, I kind of do agree. Um, so, and the short is not very good. I will say that. I mean, the only reason people might watch it is because, oh, it's the legendary short, that PTA made with Philip Baker Hall. And there's a couple of people like names in it, like Miguel Ferrer from Twin Peaks and Crossing Jordan, and like RoboCop is in it. But that helped him get his first film made, called, well, the studio called it Hard Eight. Paul Thomas Anderson's original title was Sydney, and therein laid the debacle that got Boogie Nights to be what it was, because the studio took that movie over and retitled it, repackaged it, and it's not totally the film he created. Although it is one of the shorter films he's made, because this is actually the third longest PTA film. And I was going through there thinking this was one of the shorter ones. It's like, no.
Oh, it's 2.5 hours.
Yeah, but whenever he went and pitched this, he pitched it to New Line, and he was so stung. He was also dealing with the death of his father, but he was also dealing with the fact that the studio did kind of fuck him over on the Hard Eight situation, to which I hope one day someone like Criterion or Arrow Video or just Sony pulls its head out of its ass and lets PTA recut Hard Eight and call it Sydney and give us the vision he intended back in 94, 95, whenever that film came out. But but Boogie Nights has been basically a work in progress since '88. He started writing it into a feature film from the short, and it was originally going to be kind of a mockumentary style, and then things like Waiting for Guffman were happening, and he was just like, you know what, this style is kind of played out, so he went narrative, and his original draft of the script was 300 pages. So,
of course. Well, though, I mean, it's understandable. Like, some of his first shorts were not that great. What's nice, and why I get why people that would be big fans of his films would go back and see them, is it's nice to see the evolution. Like,
yeah.
I will say this, and you can feel free to tell me that you told me so. I am very glad I saw this movie, in the sense of, I do agree. I think it is probably acting wise the best thing I've ever seen Mark Wahlberg do.
Yeah.
Like because most the reasoning being, I don't think he's been given material that challenged him in this way, and I think it's nice to see him like that. So it's
Yeah.
it's
Well, and
interesting to see where he started as to where he is now,
yeah, and he was hesitant about even doing this film.
which I get.
Yeah. Well, he read about 20 pages of the script, and he didn't read any more until he met with PTA, and because he was just worried that Paul Thomas Anderson only knew him from his underwear modeling days, and he's just like, I'm worried that you only want me for this film because I'll get in my underwear. And PTA was like, no, I saw Basketball Diaries, I saw Fear, I think you're a great actor, you were the one I wanted for this role. Although there was a casting what if. The other option in Paul Thomas Anderson's head, which could have made 1997 go very differently, was Leo.
Okay, so we got to talk about this.
Okay.
As good as this movie was, Leonardo DiCaprio made the right decision.
I think so too. Like, I don't want to see Marky Mark on the Titanic, and I don't want to see Leo because he still looked like a child back then.
Yeah, Leo looked very different, and this movie would have gone very differently.
Yeah.
I think because the nice thing about Marky Mark is he had an edge that Leonardo DiCaprio grew into, but I don't think he had at that time.
Yeah.
But because of his own difficult childhood, I think there were just some things that Mark was able to pull on that Leonardo DiCaprio may not have been able to.
All right. Well, and also, I don't know have I fully gone on my Mark Wahlberg theory, and this is applicable to a lot of things, but you just said you think this may be the best acting you've seen from Mark Wahlberg, and I'm inclined to agree. And my thing about that is, and my issue with Mark Wahlberg, like a lot of actors, specifically Adam Sandler, is they're only as good as their true investment into the film. Like, if they're there for just a paycheck, yeah, they're not going to be good. I mean, that's why we got the performances we got of Marky Mark and The Happening, and all the ones that critics like to pounce on. But here he is, he's working with Paul Thomas Anderson, and this film would go on to get Oscar nominations, and go on to work with Scorsese in The Departed. The Departed, and just all the. So I can tell right away when Mark's truly invested in the film, because he's going to give it his all. And I think even his stuff with Peter Berg lately, stuff like Patriots Day, and even though I haven't seen it, I'm going to go ahead and lump Lone Survivor in this and Deepwater Horizon, because he's truly invested in those stories.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could agree with that. And he's what I like is he's kind of revamped his image, right? And I will say this: I liked this movie and all, but I didn't need this movie to know how good of an actor he had the potential to be. Like, I didn't need this movie or this storyline for that. And I like who he has become as an actor. He's gone from the type of movies he used to do to, I'm a dad now, and I'm going to do family friendly roles, and I'm going to try to be the kind of this. He's moved into like a new evolution of the type of characters he's playing, and I like that evolution better, but it's really nice to see where he started out.
Yeah, well, for a lot of us, this was the first, either this or Fear were the first time we really saw Mark, no longer Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch, but Mark Wahlberg, the actor. And I think this is the film, this specifically is the film that made a lot of people go, okay, we'll take Mark Wahlberg serious now. And he no longer had the stink of him being a rapper or an underwear model or whatever, preconceived notions we had of him. This was the game changer. because the majority of this cast was already established. I mean, we knew Heather Graham, we knew Julianne Moore, we knew John C. Riley, assuming we were, you were one of the people that actually saw Casualties of War. So, but I mean, it was everyone involved in this. It was a huge gamble, specifically the studio, because after he got fucked on Hard 8, he when he in the pitch meeting, he basically lost his mind and started not really asking, but telling the studio head, Mike DeLuca, what the movie was going to be, because he knew, because he wasn't used to being at a studio that believed in the project. So he was jumping up on his desk going, look, listen here. It's going to be 3 hours long. It's going to be NC-17. And you see where in the script it says this. And Mike DeLuca was just like, look, calm down. This is a different situation. And the only thing DeLuca asked of him, he said, I'm only going to ask you to make one concession. And it needs to be R-rated so we can make some money back, because this is $50 million. We got to recoup, some of that money. And
thank God.
PTA took the challenge to make it R-rated. And in fact, there is a slightly more explicit cut out there. I don't know how to find it without going into the darker corners of the internet. But the film was a lot more explicit and a lot darker. And the more explicit stuff isn't even in the deleted scenes on the DVD and Blu-ray. Go ahead.
It's interesting because, and I guess that explains it. I may be desensitized from other stuff I've seen. Don't get me wrong. It was explicit. And a lot of these movies, they really, really walk that fine line between being a movie and being softcore. But it was far less
I wonder
explicit.
what franchise you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It was far less explicit than I thought it would be.
Yeah. Well, and PTA took the challenge to make it R-rated. And I think as he really was putting the film together, he realized it's not just a story about pornography. It's a story about a family. Because as fucked up as they kind of are, they're a family, for better or worse. Like Jack, as played by Burt Reynolds, the director, he's the dad. Amber is the mom, and then everyone's just part of this big group that loves each other and is there for each other until about the 80s, and then it kind of goes sideways. But while this is kind of the Dirk Diggler story, he is the character people remember most. He is, and he was kind of the selling point and the reason PTA made this film. I love so many of the side characters. Like this, you're going to disagree with this, but I think you're going to understand my position. Like for me, this is a damn near flawless film. And it's because of the people on the screen delivering the words and actions PTA put on the page.
I'm not going to entirely disagree with you, but I'm going to say it this way. There is a film within a film in this movie that is a pretty flawless movie. And there is kind of like, this sounds weird, right? Okay. And I hate to put it this way, but it's like a steak with too much fat on it. And the steak itself is good, but the fat needed to be trimmed off. Now, I say that saying I know the fat is where the flavor is. Mm-hmm. But
yeah. And to be honest, I don't think this movie has an ounce of fat on it. Like, I would love to see the 300, or not the 300-page script, honestly, but the 3-hour version that PTA wanted in his head. I do understand it is a darker and experience, and it could take away from what I like about this film so much.
Well, the only place I see that existing is in some of. Okay, you are right. The side characters are what make this such a good movie because they're so well developed. But some of them are so clearly unnecessary. Like the couple that gets married, the wedding they go to, that entire storyline did nothing, advanced nothing in the story, made no sense,
Mm.
and I didn't get the point of it being there other than it wasted time and space, and it did nothing to advance the story. And I was so
Well,
close to feeling the same way about Don Cheadle's character, but they kind of pulled that full circle, so that ended up being
oh
okay.
no! Look, I will give you that Becky Barnett, played by Nicole Parker, is kind of a character that's just there. And there is a deleted scene of her whenever things are going to shit in this film, of what happened in her life. But PTA at that point did realize that she wasn't part of the main story we wanted to tell. She was just there because she was part of the crew, and also she was there basically to tell Don Cheadle as Buck Swope that his looks are ridiculous and that he needs a new look. But but you are right. She is. If you had to lose a character, you lose her. But you do not trim Don Cheadle from this film.
No, and it was funny that I was thinking that because he was one of my favorite characters, actually.
I love his storyline, and I think I love how his look does change throughout the film, because when we first meet him, he's a black cowboy with a coffee cup, which PTA said, I just love that image. And he's just this dork. And then he tries looking like, early 80s Stevie Wonder at a certain point, and by the end of the film, he's wearing jumpsuits like fucking Run DMC. like he's just a man in search. He's a man with a dream, and sadly, he's also a man in search of a fucking identity. It's just like, will you pick a lane?
Who also does porn, but it's not clear at the start that he does porn because you don't see him in any of the shots. Like, he's not doing anything.
Right. I mean, and we didn't have to see ever. Well, and okay, I just realized the reason Becky's in the film is because when we do see the scenes of John C. Reilly as Reed Rothschild acting in the films, she's usually the girl he's with in those scenes.
Yeah, but I mean, I still think that's things you could have worked around or fixed. Like, also, William H. Macy's character. I'm not saying cut it from the just before you throw a fit.
You heard me going. You heard that breath, like, what are you about to say?
I loved his character, and I love him.
Okay.
I'm actually a big fan of Shameless, so I could totally see him doing a film like this. But the side story going on with his wife, it just seems so random. It seems so disconnected from everything else going on, which is it's fine, but
let me explain what that is. Okay, so first of all, his wife is played by Nina Hartley, who's a real life porn star, and she was kind of one of the. On how a cop drama has a cop on set to kind of talk about procedures.
So she's the porn consultant.
She was one of two. So there are two porn stars in this film that, and whenever they signed off on the film, like said, yeah, you've got, this is good. PTA kind of breathed a sigh of relief. He did reach out to Ron Jeremy, because of course you're going to reach out to Ron Jeremy, and Jeremy gave him some insight, but he's like, I don't really want to do the film or even see the film, just because this is my life. I see this every day. But throughout the film, Little Bill's wife is cheating on him constantly, breaking him down. And whenever he finally snaps and at the New Year's party kills his wife, her lover, and then ultimately himself, he's doing it right as the change from 1979 to 80. So it's the death of the 70s, and it's the death of the fun, innocent times.
Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. It's one of those. Okay. I see what he did there.
Yeah. It's like he's the literal metaphorical death for the 70s. And also, this is the only time when we refer to the 80s as the dark period. Because
oh my gosh,
80s films have the reputation of being more light and upbeat, but it's also true because things like videotape did change the porn industry, and the porno chic of the 70s of getting to go see these films in the theater, which once upon a time there was an era where porn was just it was never truly legitimate, but in the way that
Well, I just thought it was kind of ironic. Like, I thought it was kind of funny, that conversation that they had with the colonel in Jack's office about moving from film to videotape. And I was like, it's
Mhm.
just so funny, because if they had known, even when he was making this movie back in the 90s, the internet had just barely been invented. If they had known that basically the porn industry would be taken over by amateurs on the internet, would become like the largest part of the porn industry.
Yeah. Yep. And also, weirdly enough, porn is what won the VHS versus Beta fight, which you were not around for, but there were two formats for home video after, because originally you could only see films in the theater, and then you could only see films or if they played on TV. And Laserdiscs, existed, but really for the home market, it was down between VHS and Beta. And VHS won because it was cheaper and because porn started using it. Which is sad because VHS is the shittiest of shitty quality you can get for a film. Beta, they were smaller tapes, but they had a better picture, but porn helped that fight.
But to your point about it being a little bit more legitimate, I kind of thought it was funny, and I made a note of it towards the beginning of the movie, right after Jack kind of, is starting to think. I'm sorry, not Jack. Eddie's starting to think about going into the industry, and he goes to the diner with Jack.
Hmm.
And Jack was talking about how he had this dream. He really wanted to make like a film with an actual storyline. I was sitting there going, that is not like, he wanted to keep people in the theater. And I was thinking, that's not why people watch porn. Like, it's not
But
like they're
back
coming for the acting or the
then,
storyline. But back then,
it was. I mean, there were, with the exception of the hardcore scenes, there were a lot of films that, if you, and these films do exist, where you cut out the more hardcore footage and they're just a
just the
film.
room.
No, better than the. I mean, some of these films were like, how do I say this and not sound weird? Knowing what I know about that era, and there's a great book and a great documentary that kind of goes into this in a lot more depth. The book is called The Other Hollywood by Legs McNeil, who was the founder of Punk Magazine, and he wrote the great book Please Kill Me about the punk, the punk era. And I think I know William H. Macy his agent tried to keep him from even reading the scripts, and Macy read it and he was like, "No, I want to do this." Everyone
Yeah,
wanted to do
and
this.
I've
Heather
seen, like I
Graham,
said, I've
yeah,
seen Shameless. I know what William H. Macy is
yeah,
willing to do, and this
yeah.
didn't even come close to touching the line.
Mm. Well, like even Heather Graham, as Roller Girl, is made on the camera. She has to do some, you know, pretty horrible stuff, but she was just like, why aren't you picking me, thinking about me for Roller Girl? And PTA was just like, well, I've never seen you naked in a film before. And she jumped at this movie. And sadly, this film kind of did cost her family. Like, to this day, she is estranged from her parents for being in this film. Yes, there was absolutely some seedy, shady shit going on. And to this day, there is some seedy, shady shit going on in the porn industry, as well as the legitimate movie industry. It's just like anything else. There, it's corrupt and fucked no matter where you look. Um, so you'll find a lot of the performers now are usually starting their own companies or moving behind the camera to kind of get some of that control back and make it better for themselves and their co-stars.
Right. Although I have
Mm.
to say, I am convinced that much cocaine would have killed them.
There was a documentary on Showtime called X-Rated, the greatest adult films of all time, that really tells the story. And there are, I mean, they're rare now, but there are still porn films that are movies that just happen to have fuck scenes in them. And but back then it was kind of like, grindhouse theaters in 42nd Street in New York, where you could see like these B kung fu movies from, all over the world, or some of the sexier European art films that weren't porn, like, and Texas Chainsaw like, you can walk down 42nd Street and see Texas Chainsaw Massacre and Deep Throat and Sister Street Fighter, like within, feet of each other, because this was big business, and it still kind of is big. Well, I don't know now with, the internet being what it is, still the big business, but I mean, it was a big deal back then. I mean, celebrities went to porn films because they were the hot thing. If you going back to Tarantino, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, whenever, they're going to the restaurant, Sharon Tate says, "Hey, what's happening over at the Dirty Movie Theater?" And they're like, "Oh, they're having a premiere." And she was just shocked that they would have that. But
Well, and I think it says something about like the fact that Paul Thomas Anderson grew up around this in the Valley, that you could see that influence. Because what I kept thinking is, just from things I've heard, that people that work in the industry, I think there is a level of authenticity that this movie had about the porn
yeah,
industry, because not only did it kind of capture that there is a level of professionalism that
hmm
does go on
yeah,
actual sets, and there's this entirely other dark, seedy side, I imagine, especially back then,
okay. Uh, Another documentary to watch about and I highly recommend this one. There's a film called Inside Deep Throat, which was a Ron Howard produced documentary about the making of Deep Throat, the legacy, and the aftermath.
that was
Well,
on an
it
entirely another level.
well, it would have killed them if they had taken a weekend to stop, because that's usually what kills people. But I mean, they built up their tolerance so much that while it is having an effect on them, that's usually what kills people in the overdoses. It's not. It's they'll get clean and they'll stop for a while, and they'll go back thinking they can do the same amount they used to do, and that's what kills them because their tolerance changed.
Which is, while we're on the subject, we, I guess, can discuss Philip Seymour Hoffman, which this is probably, apart from The Hunger Games, the first movie I've seen since his passing. And given the subject matter of the movie, it was quite depressing.
Yeah, but when this movie was out, we didn't know Paul Philip Seymour Hoffman. There are too many people with like three names in this movie. um, but we didn't know his demons that he was fighting. But you know, this was actually the second film Hoffman was in with PTA, and he would go on to do Magnolia and Punch Drunk Love and The Master with him. And I believe his son is going to have a part in whatever his new film is called, because I'm not calling it by the stupid fake title that it's going by. Also, I don't remember what that title is off the top of my head.
Oh.
I just know it's Back in the Valley, and Bradley Cooper is the lead, and one of the sisters from Haim or however you say that group's name is.
Oh.
Yeah.
Although it does beg the question.
Mm-hmm.
I made a note of it. I wonder how much of that was just like actual cocaine.
None of it. It was actually in the commentary. PTA says it's like lactose. So basically, they're snorting milk sugar.
It was a Hollywood film set in the 90s. I was just taking a shot in the dark.
Like, the producers were going to allow the coke to go on screen and not back in their back office. But to be fair, New Line, I've never really heard the dark side of New Line. You know, like, I've never heard of Bob Shea or Mike DeLuca or really anyone doing anything shady other than, you know, putting a John Waters film into theaters. It's like, what's your film about? Well, this 300-pound drag queen at the end of the movie eats dog shit. Cool, let's put it in the theater. Don't worry, I'm never going to make you do Pink Flamingos.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That would be the moment you did murder me. I'm on the fence about Female Trouble. We're definitely doing Serial Mom. But back at that part in the diner, I love Jack's speech and I love his passion. And whenever this is probably my favorite Burt Reynolds performance. You know, sadly, it could have gone up against Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but unfortunately he passed away. But he was supposed to be George Spahn.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, Quentin wanted Burt for that part because the relationship between Leo and Brad Pitt's characters was modeled after Burt Reynolds and his stunt doubles relationship a little bit.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, this is the only other movie I've ever seen him in was the remake of The Longest Yard. And I may have seen...
Oh, come on. You live in Texas. At some point, surely one of your parents had to have shown you Smokey and the Bandit.
Oh, okay. So, yeah. They did not make me watch Smokey and the Bandit growing up. And so, no, I have not
It's not
seen
make
it.
you, it's let you. But, you know, Burt was a 70s icon, and that was one of the reasons he was hesitant about doing this film. And sadly, this is a film. All right, as great as Burt Reynolds is in this movie, and it's my favorite Burt Reynolds performance, and I have seen Smokey and the Bandit, and I can still make that call. Burt Reynolds fucking hated this movie.
I get it.
He turned it down 7 times, and even after seeing a cut of it, he was kind of disgusted by it, and he even got an Oscar nomination. And a lot of people speculate that the reason he didn't win, and I think he would have deserved the win, is because he's so distanced himself from this film, and that's why he's not in Magnolia, and he didn't have a nice word to say about Burt and about PTA. PTA is, you know, kind of dicey when he talks about Burt, but I mean, he loved Burt on the commentary. So
yeah, despite how good this movie is, it is incredibly, incredibly dark, and I can see how just the subject matter of the movies and the things that the actors had to do would make you want to distance yourself from it.
honestly, everyone, a couple of people did have their reservations. Like Julianne Moore read the whole script, and she was just like, PTA was worried that she was, you know, what her reaction was, and she was like, no, thank you for writing me a character like this. Most of the people on this film, because they are super Catholic, and they stopped speaking to her.
Yeah, and there's just, you can tell, right? There's certain actors and actresses that have particular lines that they will not cross for whatever reason. And didn't you say that Marky Mark has had a little bit of regret about doing the film?
Marky Mark, there was a story that came out, and it could have been, you know, overblown clickbait, but Marky Mark said he apologized to God for doing such a film. But I mean, he asked to keep his fake penis from the movie, and he had it displayed in his home. So I mean, he kind of does owe his career to this movie in a lot of ways. So I kind of wanted on this film to talk about some of the sequences in this film, because when I made the notes for this film, I went back to my old ways of going kind of scene by scene to try to create talking points, and sadly, I did them from fucking memory because I've seen this film enough times to have done that. And I even started working puns in. But I think the first sequence I really want to talk about, and it's towards the end of the film, is the one scene in this film that even whenever I rewatched it last night without the commentary, it still has me on edge, and that is the sequence at Rahad's house, the mansion where Dirk and Reed and Thomas Jane as Todd Parker go to rip off Alfred Molina. That scene, to this day, still keeps me on edge.
Well, I loved that scene because I actually think that scene was so necessary. One of the things that
Well, and it has a real life inspiration too.
from what?
Okay, so all right, let's backtrack a little bit. So one of the obvious influences on the character of Dirk, the Dirk Diggler story, and this film in general, is a porn star named John Holmes. I don't expect you to know that name, but he was a porn star from the 70s and 80s with a legendarily large dick. So that, and like Dirk in this film, creating the character Brock Landers, so he and Reed could kind of do the kind of James Bondish films they were doing. Holmes had a character called Johnny Wad, where he was basically doing the same. The difference between Dirk and Holmes, well, one of the many differences between Dirk and Holmes, is that Dirk was all about not being degrading to women, about being sexy rather than just, gross. And John Holmes was kind of gross. And John Holmes did sadly die of AIDS. One of the rare exceptions of the rule, because not a lot of porn stars have died of AIDS, and that's part of the reason that it's not mentioned in the film, even though part of the film takes place in the 80s. And the reason for that is because porn stars basically sleep with each other.
Right.
And yeah, so and it's kind of PTA says it's kind of incestuous, so that's what. But that's what kind of keeps them, and they are smart now. And for a lot of them, they use protection. There's a lot that don't. There is still danger. Disclaimer. All right, so there was a documentary made about John Holmes called Exhausted. It was essentially a love letter to John Holmes and how great he was and how big he was and blah, 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 blah. I'm taking PTA's, explanation verbatim. And that's kind of what inspired the Dirk Diggler story, as well as Amber's documentary in this movie. And like Dirk, John Holmes loved him some cocaine. There was an incident. There is a movie made about it called Wonderland. The incident was called the Wonderland Murders, where John Holmes did go with some people to rip off a drug dealer, and instead of just, it didn't go the way that it went in this film, but basically people ended up dead, and John Holmes was there. John Holmes didn't kill anybody, but he was there.
Gotcha.
So that kind of served for the inspiration for that scene. It has a subtitle, Long Way Down, One More Thing, which was a nod to the film's composer, Michael Penn, who I want to talk about in a minute because he's in one of my favorite moments of this film. But he's the film's composer, but he's also a singer-songwriter, and he had a song called Long Way Down. But in that sequence was PTA's acknowledgement of the Wonderland murders. Yeah.
Well, I think it was kind of a brilliant way to do what needed to be done because, one of the brilliant things, I think probably my favorite thing about this entire movie is I thought it was going to be the opposite of what it was. I thought this was going to be kind of an anti-hero story because nobody in this film is really a good person, with the exception of...
I would debate that.
There's a few.
Well, here's the thing. I think they are good people. Like, I think they are troubled people, but some more than others. But I would hesitate to call anyone in this film, with the exception of maybe Todd Parker, a bad person.
And I mean, I can agree with that, but they're not the quintessential hero.
No.
They're flawed heroes. But Eddie kind of starts out as not so much a flawed hero, but a victim. And then he becomes a flawed hero, I guess you could say, because it goes to his head, he gets deep into drugs, and he becomes an asshole. And
Yeah.
this was the thing he needed to bring him back down.
Yeah. But one of the questions I have for this film is, like, even after this experience where he nearly died, his friend Todd did die, and it was the thing that he needed to humble him to go back to Jack and beg for apology. But as we see in that last scene where he's practicing lines as Brock Landers, it's like, did he learn a fucking thing?
Nope.
Yeah. And in my notes, it's like I wrote the happy question mark ending, because it's like, are any of them really happy at the end of this movie? Like, obviously, Buck's happy, and Jesse's happy, and Reed is happy, and Maurice is happy. Fucking Jack is happy. But it's like, is Dirk still in the same headspace, and is Amber okay? Those are the questions I have. Like, even Roller Girl is happy at the end of this film.
Right. But I don't think this story is meant to have a happy ending just because of the life that most of these characters were living.
But at the same time, like, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with the life they're living. Like, I don't want to come off like we're, shaming them for their, for working basically in the sex industry. But I will shame them for, like, being so heavily into drugs and taking it out on people and ruining the relationships with their children. Because Amber is the mom, because Amber is the mom to everyone in the family, because she can't see her own film. I mean, because she can't see her own kid, because her ex-husband, accused her, and it may or may not be true, of having their kids on a set where they were exposed to drugs and sex and stuff that could be damaging to a child.
Right. And I guess, that's kind of what I mean. Like, that's why the characters in this movie are interesting, but they cannot be like the quintessential hero, because they're so, the situations that they are in are so deeply flawed, which a lot of it could be essentially broken down to them sort of being victims of their circumstances. Mark Wahlberg's character, it's obvious where his headspace is coming from is because of his mother. And with Amber...
But also, if you'll remember, whenever he's with his girlfriend before he leaves Torrance for the Valley, his girlfriend, Cheryl Lynn, played by the actress that plays fucking Tina on The L Word, Laura Holloman, she, not to be crass, but I'm just kind of quoting the film. She tells him that he's got an amazing cock and that he's great at fucking her. And his thing is like, well, everyone has that one special thing. And whenever he's fighting with his mom, he's like, you don't know what I can do. And the one thing he can do in this world, besides snort coke, is fuck. That's what he's good at. So, when you're as endowed as him, and he had people paying him $5, $10 to either just look at it or, see him jack off.
Yeah, that's definitely coupled, though, with the fact that his mother is telling him that he would never amount to anything. So I think when he grew up with that mentality, finding out the one thing that people praised him for, obviously he was going to cling to that. And then Maggie was so deep into her addiction, and which is either a situation of a way to cope.
And since she couldn't have her own son, she got way into Dirk. Although, back to Dirk's dick for a minute, I love in this film everyone's reactions to it whenever they see it for the first time, because when Roller Girl goes to kind of seduce him, she's just like, oh shit. Whenever he meets the Colonel and he shows it off, he's just looking down, and he's got that smile, and he's just like in his. I hear in his head, "I'm about to make a fuckload of money off of this kid."
I mean, I thought the only reason I really thought it was funny is just because it added some much needed levity to this very, very dark film,
Yeah.
which is
Well,
kind of the whole purpose of John C.
mhm.
Riley's character for me, was just to
Okay.
be kind of this goofy, funny. But hold on, the one thing that bothered me about it is
Mm.
he very much just reminded me of his character from Step Brothers.
Hard to disagree. But also, I haven't seen Step Brothers in a while, so you see, whenever I see John C. Riley in something like Step Brothers, I think back to films like this and Magnolia and Heart 8 and go, I miss that John C. Riley. Like, I love that John C. Riley's found his niche and is popular, but because in Magnolia and Heart 8, he plays kind of really tragic characters, and in this one, yeah, he gets to be goofy, but he's also kind of tragic in a way. And like, this is what I miss. Like, I want Paul Thomas Anderson to go grab his friend and be like, no, let's make a film together again. That's really what I want. Because I mean, yeah, and part of the reason he's in this movie is PTA saw him in Casualties of War. He's like, I want to be best friends with that guy, and I want to put him in my movie. And he's just like, I just want to spend the rest of my life laughing with my friend John C. Riley. So, and yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess you do get shades of who he would become. Like, specifically, whenever the shit has hit the fan, and they think that Dirk could be a musician, which, by the way, did happen in porn, because the song More and More and More by the Andrea True Connection, she was a porn star. And you've heard that song. If
Yes.
you've seen indie films set in the 70s, you fucking heard that song. So the guy playing the studio engineer is Michael Penn, who is the film's composer. He's Amy Mann's husband. Amy Mann would go on to do part of the soundtrack for the next film, Magnolia. He's Sean and Chris Penn's brother. But he's just a great musician and composer. But John C. Riley's direction from Paul Thomas Anderson in all of those scenes was to try to break Michael Penn. And if you'll see, like, whenever Dirk is, and I'm using this word very loosely, singing You Got the Touch, which is a song from Transformers the movie, you'll just see John C. Riley just dancing like a fucking idiot. and the whole purpose was like just to try to crack up Michael Penn, because that's what Paul told him to do. Which, of the two songs, they are both on the soundtrack to this film. You Got the Touch is a bonus track, but the song Feel the Heat that's just Dirk and Reed singing. Paul Thomas Anderson wrote that song, and that clip from the movie actually opens up the soundtrack.
Really?
Yeah. And it's like, God, if I was ever in a band, I would want, we were like doing a covers album, I would cover that and try to do what Mark did and try to sing it intentionally badly and make people think, oh God, what have we gotten into before doing something proper? But I kind of love that moment. Funny story, I had the soundtrack, and me and my friend were listening to it while we were playing like dominoes or something. And as it ended, and then the bonus track, If You Got the Touch, came on, it was about a minute in. He was just like, you have to turn this off because I can't count anymore. This is so bad.
Yeah, that was the point in the movie where I just thought the movie had gone a little bit off the deep end.
Well, I mean, all these people were riding high for the first hour and a half of this movie. You had to show them basically you had to show the fall of all these characters, because the 70s were the lighthearted time and the 80s were the era where things got bad for them. And the studio head who they were trying to get the tapes from, that's Bob Downey Sr. And Bob Downey Sr. wrote a film called Putney Swope, which is where Buck Swope got his name, and it's an incredibly bizarre film. It's essentially a satire about advertising. And all right, to go back to the sequence at the drug dealer's house that they were robbing, the kid throwing the firecrackers around, that was inspired from Putney Swope because that shit happened. Because I remember watching that film last year for the first time and going, "Holy shit, that's where he got this." So
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and Putney Swope is a film where the lead character is a black man, but the guy either couldn't act or wasn't available for dubs. So Bob Downey Sr. dubbed his lines himself, and it is right there on the line of bad taste. I don't know if it's on the side of almost or just barely bad taste, but it was also like the late 60s and early 70s, and you could still get away with something like that. I also don't think you would like the film at all. Let's talk about the Colonel for a little bit.
Oh, the Colonel.
Yeah. So the Colonel is played by a guy named Robert Ridgely, who is the other person this film is dedicated to after Ernie Anderson, because sadly he passed away before the film was out. But he was friends with Ernie Anderson, and Paul Thomas Anderson had known him since childhood. And you may have seen him as the executioner in Blazing Saddles. But,
No.
Okay. Wait, you haven't seen Blazing Saddles?
At this point, are you surprised by anything I have not seen?
In that one particular, yeah. I have so
Look,
much work to do.
the most I can say about his character is why was I not at all surprised when he turned out to be a pedophile?
Yeah. Well, someone had to, and naturally it was going to be the money guy. But the reason PTA gave him this role is because he grew up, when Paul Thomas Anderson was growing up, all Bob Ridgely would do was come over and hang out with Paul and like make him laugh, like singing him like inappropriate songs about Winnie the Pooh and Eeyore having sex. And so he just had this great, but he had this great respect for Bob and put him in what PTA maintains to this day is the finest performance he's ever done. Going back to the scene between Floyd Gondoli, Jack, and the Colonel talking about the videotape, whenever the Colonel delivers maybe one of my favorite lines in the film about liking butter in his ass and lollipops in his mouth, Bob Ridgely is in the background, and Paul Thomas Anderson actually had to blur the shot because, and you see it, because Ridgely is on the couch laughing his ass off.
I mean, okay, so the dialogue in this movie is the best word I can use for it is colorful.
I would go with exceptional. Like, I love the dialogue in this film, and that's part of what makes this film for me, because I mean, what I've described this film as very quotable, and it's only quotable really if you're sitting around talking about Boogie Nights. Like, I've actually been very restrained from just quoting this film because there's very few of these lines that I think could just make into everyday conversation. Like, I'll have what she's having, and other films, other lines from other films. But I think what made me love Paul Thomas Anderson here, and it's evolved over the years, but it's still very true, is like Tarantino, like Kevin Smith, like Cameron Crowe used to be able to do, like Sorkin, he is great with dialogue. Now, PTA has a little bit more of a different style of direction than some of them. He got compared a lot to Tarantino, and he got compared a lot to Scorsese when this film came out. And he was just like, no, I was ripping off Jonathan Demme in Silence of the Lambs.
Well, actually, I can see that Tarantino comparison, because some of what frustrated me about this movie, because it didn't go full Tarantino, is there was large chunks where I was having trouble following where the story was headed. There were sequences of scenes that were random. They played no part in the story. They seemed to have no effect. And particularly, like I said, with Don Cheadle's character, who I loved, didn't seem to be playing any critical role. And then when he gets to the donut shop and that scene in the donut shop happens, I was like, what the hell is this scene? This scene serves no purpose. And then he sees the money bag on the floor.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden I get it. And that was my Tarantino moment.
Well, in that scene, like Roller Girl in the limousine doing the On the Town film, which is actually based on a real porno called On the Prowl that this guy Jamie Gillis made. But at that point, Dirk is now a hustler. Roller Girl and Amber are just doing coke in Amber's bedroom, and Roller Girl is asking if she's her mom. And then Roller Girl doing the On the Town film or On the Prowl. That guy who recognizes her from high school, and she just, I still don't know if that guy's dead because she's kicking him in the face with her roller skates. And Dirk going back to hustling and being paid by guys to watch him jerk off, and then the guy that's paying him to do that ends up beating him and robbing him. Don Cheadle being part of that group. This is also where we were supposed to see Becky being abused by her husband and Dirk having to come to her rescue. But PTA realized that scene didn't even need to be there. It is on the DVD, so. But I think there is a point to Buck being there. And now that I'm on the spot, I can't exactly explain what it is, since you don't see him in any of Jack's films, but he works with Jack and he's always there. But that, between Dirk getting beaten, Buck being in the middle of that robbery gone wrong, and Roller Girl kicking that guy's face in, that's the point where you're like, wow, everything has gone to shit. But him getting that money is the part where things are starting to look up for some of the characters. And then it takes Dirk getting killed by Alfred Molina in a robe to the sound of fucking 99 Luft balloons to wake up. Which, and by the way, I love in the happy question mark ending that when we see the Colonel, he's in jail and having been beaten by his cellmate. But,
yeah, I would call that a happy ending.
Yeah. I will say, even though it is detestable what the Colonel did, being caught with an underage girl and then having pictures of kids, that scene whenever Jack hangs up on him in the visitation room and he's just, having his Midnight Express moment, holding his hand up on the glass, asking if Jack is his friend, it's honestly kind of heartbreaking, and that's a testament to how good Ridgely is, just because here's a guy that he's done something absolutely unforgivable, and you're just seeing, and maybe it's heartbreaking for Jack, because he's having to turn his back on someone who was, up until like 2 minutes ago, was his friend.
Right. It's the same way as when she goes to try to get custody of her son.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, after her, I'm assuming, ex-husband or or her children's father throws everything out there on the table and she's crying afterwards, your heart breaks for her, even though she probably didn't need to have custody of her kids at that time.
Yeah. Fun fact about that scene, the judge is played by Veronica Hart, who's also a porn star, and her ex-husband was played by John Doe from the band X, who you should check out the album Los Angeles. It's fucking great.
Oh.
Not necessarily you, Sammy, but just listen, like the listeners, like go listen to Los Angeles and just try to ignore some of the language that's in the song Los Angeles. It was written in the 70s. There's some slurs in the song. Just saying. So I kind of feel like I need to start asking the questions, like, what are some things that, And be careful to ask me the same question. But what are some things that you liked that we haven't talked about?
Really, what I liked came down to I loved Mark Wahlberg's performance. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
when I started this movie, I was like, I'm I thought, man, this is going to be a movie I appreciate, but it's going to be a movie I have a hard time with because
Mm-hmm.
I don't feel for any of these people because it took me a while. Like at the start, I was struggling to see what the story he was trying to tell. And where I turned was the scene with Eddie and Eddie's mom, because that's when I started to feel for him. And he's the one I felt for the majority of the movie because he did a really good job. And a lot of this is down to the directing too, of being a character that you really felt for because he went from a bad situation at home to a situation where it's hard to remember it because he seemed older, but he was a 17-year-old kid. He was supposed to be in high school, and he was taken advantage of as badly
Yeah.
as he wanted to be in this industry. um he was a little bit taken advantage of, and I don't think this movie has a happy ending, but I also think that's a good thing and is something I liked about the film because this movie shouldn't have had a happy ending.
Yeah. And it could have had a darker ending too, because in the original short, the Dirk Diggler story, Dirk died, so everyone's talking about him in past tense.
Right.
Yeah.
So what did you like about this movie that we haven't talked about?
Okay. Wait, crack my
45
knuckles.
seconds or less.
Oh, come on. No, okay, because I'm going to start with the opening of this film on how it starts on that black screen, and it kind of starts with that very depressing, as PTA calls it, broken circus music before going into Best of My Love. I love that opening shot where it's basically like the Scorsese Touch of Evil opening to the player, tracking shot all through the club where we meet all the characters. There's not an important line of dialogue spoken, but it's just like, here are players. You're gonna meet them all later, but here they are. Here's their world. Um, I love the scene where Eddie is now, moving into Jack's house, and the first time he meets Reed, uh, where it's just kind of this macho posturing where they're talking about how much do you lift, how much do you squat? Hey, have you seen that movie Star Wars? Because people tell me I look like Han Solo. Like, I just love seeing them, like, it's like, okay, I'll give you like Step Brothers. It's that, like, did we just become best friends? I love the scene in the diner where Jack is talking about his dream. I love how passionate Jack is about his work. And yeah, it's a little bit of pretension, but Jack sees himself as a filmmaker, and for all intents and purposes, he is a filmmaker. It's just, you're not going to see his films on HBO, but you might, you know, you can probably still see them somewhere. Um, I love the soundtrack to this movie. I own it. There's a volume 2 that I can't find, but it's just got all this great 70s music, and it made me really. This is the moment I fell in love with the song Jesse's Girl. This is the moment where I felt like I will always forever associate Sister Christian and Jesse's Girl with this movie, even though I produced a production of Rock of Ages and Sister Christian is in that movie. That's one of the rare songs I don't go back to that production whenever I hear it on the radio or something. I go back to Boogie Nights and thinking, oh man, Alfred Molina just doing coke and doing the air piano and the drums. And I may or may not do that along with him when I watch this movie. um, I love that kind of montage where Dirk is making it, um, and he's except like he's going to buy the shoes, and Reed's just like he's like, are those reptile? He's like, no, they're Italian. Like, it's moments like that I love, where I just love the dialogue, and I love that dance sequence where they have in the club where it's just like PTA asked the choreographer, I think it was Adam Shankman that did it. He's just like, give me all the 70s in one dance, and he fucking nailed it. I love the first time Dirk is filming a porno because all of that dialogue that they have to say is from an actual porn, because PTA is just like, you can't call it ridiculous now that you know it's real. And I love that part in the commentary where he says, you know, you think you're a good actor, but wait till you have to act badly. I, we haven't really talked about her, but I love Melora Walters in this film because she's Buck Swope's wife. We kind of first meet her at the Adult Video Awards, and um, she goes on to be in one of the first Brock Landers movies. I hate that she has such a small part in this film because I really like her, but PTA took care of her in the next film, Magnolia. She's got a bigger, much more important part. Ricky Jay in this is Kurt, the photographer and editor. And I love that kind of sequence of editing scenes that they have together, where him and Bert, where the first time it's just like do this on the first film, and it's just like, yeah, we can do this. And then the second one, Bert's just like, this is the one they're going to remember me for. And he's just like, yeah, it's a real film, Jack. And then on the third time, when they're in the videotape era, it's just like, he's just like, it is what it is. I love when we meet Floyd. Yeah, I'm still doing this. I love when we meet Floyd Gondoli, and because PTA is such a Philip Baker Hall stan, he's just like, I'm going to film you coming in 3 different times, 3 different ways. And he's like, it's going to make sense when you see the film. And I just love that. I love that intro to him. It's very dark when it happens, but I love the scene where they're at the party at Jack's house, and the guy, they get called to that bedroom where the girl is ODing, and Robert Ridgely's just like taking care of this. He's like, he's almost like the wolf from Pulp Fiction. And the guy just starts crying. He goes, this is twice that some chick has OD'd on me. He goes, well, don't you think that maybe it's time to get some better shit? And he just kind of slaps him. He's like, look at this, with all this fucking conversation. Like, I could literally go on and describe almost every scene, and and say every line of dialogue. This movie is just like ingrained in me, and this is a film that made me find a director that made me fall in love with his works. And I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question, but you can't ask it to me because I don't have an answer. But Sammy, what did you not like about this film?
Okay, so tell us how you really feel. I was going to answer. I honestly, I thought we should have done it as a stretch and made you find something you did not like about this film. But that being said,
I really did try. I mean, the closest I could think of is, like, I agree with you that Becky Barnett is kind of dead weight. That is what you have done to me in this conversation, is make me realize that you could have lost Becky and nothing would have been gained or lost, even though I'm glad she's there.
Right. And I am going to go back to something else that I liked. So this is something I really respected. When this started out, he had an uphill battle. If you're going to tell a story about anti-heroes, if you're essentially going to have a whole bunch of semi-unlikable people, and you're going to make them be sympathetic in 2 hours, that is a tough hill to climb. That's why not a lot of movies climb it, and generally that's not the route they go. Where you see that as television, because you can do that in a television series. You can give the characters an arc.
Yeah, and if I can butt in for a second, that is why the film Wonderland and the film Lovelace, which is about Linda Lovelace and the making of Deep Throat, that's why those films are not very good.
Right, and I will grant him this, he did a phenomenal job in this amount of time with actually making these characters sympathetic. Like, making me care about them and what happened to them. I'm very glad with how it ended, because I think it's the legitimate best way this story could have ended. On the dislike side, I don't have much criticism about this movie, other than there was parts of it that were a little bit slow. And basically what I said earlier, I think that he could have made it a little bit shorter by cutting out some unnecessary.
He cut half an hour out of this film.
I get it, but by cutting some unnecessary stuff, but it's not like offensive that it's in there. It's just unnecessary, and it doesn't. I will particularly notice when you have something that does not advance the story. That's essentially purposeless, and that's all it was.
Well, and also you talk a lot about advancing the story, and one of Paul Thomas Anderson's big influences is Robert Altman, and Robert Altman is a guy that made films that you were usually ensemble casts like this that had multiple stories going on, interactions between multiple characters and connections between them, and a lot of times dialogue is talking over people talking over people, and it doesn't have necessarily a linear story or we went from A to B to C. It's just a lot of randomness, but those films are great. And I think it's because I've seen a lot of Altman stuff, and I've seen everything PTA has done, and I kind of am where you don't have to tell me a traditional story for me to like your film. Your film just has to be about interesting people doing interesting things. And if you do that, you're at least getting a 3-star rating from me. I mean, fuck, I like the Entourage movie. But
well, see, and I think that's where I'm a little bit different, because like one of the things I don't like about Wes Anderson is his stories.
Well, Wes Anderson is quirky for the sake of being quirky.
Right. Is first of all, he's artsy for the sake of being artsy, and two is dude never tells a straightforward story. It's all over the place. It makes no sense. And to this day, I mean, Paul Thomas Anderson's stepping in there, but he still made a cohesive storyline. To this day, the only person I've ever seen that can effectively pull that kind of bullshit off is Quentin Tarantino.
Yeah. Well, and you got to remember, there's also kind of this between film snobs, not between themselves, this kind of dick measuring contest going on between PTA and QT, because one will make a film and then another make a film, and it's like they almost kind of like play off of each other, and it's just like each one kind of upping their game with each film they make, and they both, and to use your words, they both make films about kind of unlikable people.
Okay.
And they make them interesting.
Here's the deal. I'm going to ask you this question first because we already know your answer. So, just for the sake of asking the question, John, did you survive this movie?
I'm going to have to think about it. Can you come back to me later in the meeting? Yes, I love this film. This is in my top 10 films. This is number 9. This is just above Do the Right Thing. Like, it's just above Do the Right Thing, and it's just
what's it just below?
I had to look that up. I think it's Zodiac is the one that's just above it, but it falls into that niche I love, where it's either films from the 70s or about the 70s or about Hollywood. You know, those are gold for me, Jerry. Those are gold. I want to know if you survived this film, and I'm kind of curious about something else that I want to bring up after you give me your answer.
Okay. So, first of all, that kind of makes sense. And I get a little something now about this whole film dynamic we have, because the 70s is like one of my least favorite decades.
But you're also not as immersed into it. And here's the thing. I've got a weird confession for you. I did not love Pulp Fiction the first time I saw it, because I didn't understand what was going on with this timeline, what was going on, what the point of certain things was, up until the moment they blew Marvin's brains out. And then I'm like, okay, this is fun. So I went back and watched it again. And I've noticed that a lot of directors I like Quentin, like PTA, like the Coen brothers, like sometimes Scorsese, you have to give a film at least 2 watches to fully appreciate it. I'm not saying to get it, I'm saying to fully appreciate it. Because like I said about PTA's last film, Phantom Thread, I liked it, but it wasn't until the second watch I really got what he was doing. I don't want to say anything insulting, but you don't necessarily seek out films like that.
No. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. And so I'm more willing to give something very off the beaten path a chance on the possibility that there might be something here. So, and whenever you discover someone like a Paul Thomas Anderson, for me, I'm like, this is a total win. Like, I liked Boogie Nights from the first time I saw it, but I was in college and I had seen most of Tarantino's output, so I was prepared. And also, someone had warned me about Magnolia that was not supposed to make sense. And when I watched it, I'm like, it kind of makes total sense. You're an idiot.
Well, I'm more I will watch something off the beaten path, and I found stuff off the beaten path, but I don't go looking for it. So if I
Yeah.
find it, it's because I ran across it, not so much because I sought it out.
Or I forced it upon you.
Right. Okay, so
Yeah.
did I survive? Here's the first thing I'm gonna say. I feel like we need to get this out of the way. We need to have this argument and have this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the best movie of 1997. I'm sorry. This is I get where you're coming from, but this is you took your number 9 movie and put it up against my number 1 favorite movie of all time. This is not going to be
Well,
Titanic. Like it's
well, to
just
be fair,
not.
the Academy Awards didn't even give this movie a chance to go up against Titanic. But to me, 97 is a very strong year in film. And look, I have gone on the internet multiple times and defended Titanic because people trash that film and it's unnecessarily. Like, is it long? Is it cheesy? Yeah, but is that the fucking point? Yeah. And so I'm not. For me, this maybe is the best film in 1997, but I also haven't seen every film from 1997. Once upon a time, I would have said L.A. Confidential was the best film of 1997. So, I mean, I wasn't expecting this movie to dethrone Titanic, and quite frankly, had it, I would have been like, "Who are you, and what have you done with my co-host? You imposter!"
Yeah, there was just no
So,
way.
yeah. I mean,
I have
but
loved
also,
that movie since I have loved that movie since I was 8 years old, and I definitely
yeah.
have a very large Titanic poster that hangs in my bedroom.
Oh, nice. But you got to remember, best and worst are also subjective. This is one of those things like neither of us are right and neither of us are wrong.
That being said, yes, I survived this movie. I thought it was very good. Is it a movie I'll watch a lot? Probably not. It's
Definitely not as much as I watch it.
right. It's very dark and twisted, and that's good. Like I like the way it was done. I thought the acting was phenomenal. It's very well written. I thought it was very well executed, but it is long, and um, the subject matter is one that if I'm going to go dark is not particularly something I'm interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So I would definitely watch this movie again for sure. And I did survive it.
All right. So I did go and look it up. Zodiac was not my number 8. Zodiac's my number 7. Taxi Driver was my number 8.
Man, you
So
really like Zodiac. I had no idea.
I love, again, it's a film about the 70s.
Oh, well.
And it's a film that has great dialogue and an ensemble cast and a story that sadly ultimately ends up going nowhere.
Another
Okay,
controversial
so
opinion. 80s was a better decade.
wrong, but I'll still let you be on the show. So the question I wanted to ask is, and would you be willing to? And we're not gonna make a separate podcast about this, and I'm not gonna shoehorn this in on every movie of the month. But would you be willing to check out some of Paul Thomas Anderson's other works now that you've seen what I would call the most accessible Paul Thomas Anderson film there is?
Absolutely, because I actually do really want to see There Will Be Blood. I have wanted to
I
see that for a long time, and I also would like to see Master. So if I were to start, that's probably where I'd start.
Okay, I would honestly say you should do them in this order now that you've seen Boogie Nights. You should see Magnolia. I'm not saying it's going to change your life, but I'm saying that should be where you go next. It is his longest. It is his most up his own ass. But it's basically most of these same actors coming back, in different formats. Like I said earlier with the Rubber Soul Revolver comparison, both albums made by the Beatles, but both very different yet similar. I think you should go to The Master and then Punch Drunk Love.
Oh yeah, I
Then
forgot about
see
that.
then
Okay.
see There Will Be Blood, and then I kind of want you to go back and see Hard Eight, and then maybe Phantom Thread, then The Master, then Inherent Vice, because those last three, Phantom Thread, The Master, and Inherent Vice, are the three you're going to struggle with the most.
I'm gonna already go out there on a limb and say Phantom Thread. Maybe it'll happen someday, but I'm gonna have to have like mono because I have almost no interest walking into that movie in the subject matter of the movie. So it would be very it's
Well,
a time investment, and that's what it is with movies, right? I'm
mhm,
very selfish with my time.
I
So
I am too.
I
Like,
have to, it's got to be something that there's either a reason I want to see it because I want to become more well educated on film, or it's got to be a movie I just really want to
yeah.
see.
Okay, so maybe flip flop. All right. Leave Inherent Vice is the last one, because that was the movie I thought, oh, Paul Thomas Anderson is going to make a spiritual sequel to Boogie Nights. Nope, that's not what this is. I mean, it's another film about the '70s, but fuck, is it weird? But I think Inherent. All right, so Master, then Phantom Thread, then Inherent Vice, and in fact, Inherent Vice is the one I still kind of struggle with. Like, I like it, but I don't love it. If I may say something slightly negative about the director I stand this hard for, but I am genuinely curious because the Tarantino Paul Thomas Anderson comparison has been out there for years, and since you love Tarantino the way you do, although there are still some blind spots for you in that particular area that I'm very curious about. I'm curious what you would think about some of PTA's other stuff.
Okay.
And I will be very happy if when you make it through Magnolia, you become an Amy Mann fan.
All right.
All right. So now that we've gotten Boogie Nights in front of your eyes, and I can sleep happily tonight, knowing that you survived it, uh, we're back next week. We're back later doing an actual chick flick again. Well, a film about a strong woman, and directed by a woman. We're talking about the new film from starring Frances McDormand, Nomadland. It just hit Hulu. It's a 2021 film. I'm counting it despite IMDb saying it's 2020. It's just now gotten released, but I'm
And it's
looking
by,
forward to this.
I am too. And okay, so our next manly movie of the month, we go from number 9 on your list to number 2 on mine.
How do I like them apples?
Yes. To what I
Oh
consider
my!
to be one of
Wait,
the
wait, wait.
most what?
So we're doing Drinking Game, the movie?
Oh God. No, we're fine. Oh yeah, we are, because we are finally gonna
Yeah.
have and settle the Ben Affleck Matt Damon argument.
I don't think we're gonna settle it here. I think it's just gonna happen again.
I hate to give Ben Affleck any compliments, but I do, however, think Good Will Hunting is probably one of the most brilliant,
Yeah.
brilliant scripts
So
ever written.
we're doing Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. Huh. But that's at the end of March. But after Nomadland, you want to give them a taste of what you're doing to me after Nomadland?
We are finally gonna conclude the To All the Boys I've Loved Before trilogy. Look at it this way, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid, then it'll be over.
That is true, but we've also got more Nicholas Sparks and the Heigl-Apocalypse coming too. So,
well, the Heigl-Apocalypse is entirely your fault. That's self-inflicted. So,
yeah, but you agreed to it, and there are going to be weeks where we both suffer. But anyway, so thank you folks for joining us. We'll be back with Nomadland next week. Until then, follow us on social media. We've got a Facebook, we've got a Twitter. One of us has started doing things with the Facebook because the other one kind of refuses to. That would be me. While also running our TikTok and Instagram. If there's something you would like us to watch, like us to review, or you just want to drop us a line and give suggestions, tips, hints, cookie recipes, just email, some kind of chain letter that if we don't pass it to our family, then some ghost girl is going to come kill us in the middle of the night. Just shoot us an email at survivingchickflicks@gmail.com. And like us on Apple Podcasts, follow us on Spotify. We're all over the place, people, except we're still not on Google Podcasts. So I've given up. But Sammy, thank you for enduring Boogie Nights. I'm glad that I may be able to usher you into the larger world of Paul Thomas Anderson now.
Well, thank you. I'm glad it was better than expected.
Yeah. See, I'm not always trying to lead you into danger. Although later this month we may be having a different argument. But until then, thank you all for listening. Surviving Chick Flicks is created and hosted by John Baggett and Samantha McDaniel. Our audio engineer and editor is Cody McLean. For an ad-free version of the show, please visit patreon.com/survivingchickflicks, where $5 a month gets you an ad-free version of the show as well as our manly movie of the month. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram, and please give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. All opinions are that of the host, and no copyright infringements are intended. Surviving Chick Flicks is a Circle of Jug production, all rights reserved.
Are you giving me shit, Kurt?
No, hey, no way with it, Bill.
My fucking wife has an ass in her cock in the driveway, Kurt. All right? I'm sorry if my thoughts are not on the photography of the film we're shooting tomorrow, okay?
Okay, no big deal.